understand, like we're talking about a lot from what I'm hearing from you is the environment. Also, like the either it's at home, the parental support, whether it was school, the peer pressure. So an environment plays a major role in influencing a kid's life. So I'm talking about early teenagers, when they get started with the process. Like I wanted to understand, like how can we ensure that every kid is provided with a safe home environment. So now we're talking about home, so because we understand like a lot of kids who go through traumatic or toxic households, they take different pathways to get rid of it. We also research shows that the kids whose parents have been incarcerated, the probability of them being incarcerated goes higher. So I wonder, like, how can we make sure that every kid is provided with a safe home environment? What are some thoughts that you can share, especially with the parents? How can the of parents, caretakers, guardians,
Yeah.
what can they do?
So, so this is a big question because all parents do their best. And sometimes their best is not enough
That's
because
true.
every kid is different, right? Some kids are high needs and some kids are lower needs, and there's not a one size fits all approach
So,
to parenting. And parents, when we say that expression of, that kid is getting out of hand or getting out of our hands, it's that idea that parents don't know what else to do.
they tried whatever they could.
Yeah. And sometimes they literally disengage. Like they're like, I don't know. So whatever. Like, I don't know how to help them. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on. They don't want to talk. I tried. And so I don't want to, blame everything on parents because of that,
Yeah.
sentiment. But I really feel that parents do their best, but sometimes the best is still not good enough. And I think that in circumstances where parents feel that their kid is getting out of hands, it's also up to the parents to say, let's go get help. It's
So
not just the kid that needs help, is we as parents need help parenting. And we need, and we have shows. I don't know if you've seen shows like the Super Nanny. Like,
no, no, no.
have you seen?
I have
Okay.
heard a lot about it, but no, not.
So there's like TV shows where like professional nannies go into households to identify behavioral problems with kids, and they link it to parental patterns. Like they link it, well, you're letting them get away with it. Look at that. You're not even listening to what they have to say. And then the more you don't listen, the more they react and the more
Yeah.
aggressive they are. And so it's not just, psychologically the child's problem. It's an exchange, it's an interrelational, it's, a relationship problem. And so these super nannies go into these households, they help the parents and the kids establish better routines, better communication opportunities, and things like that. And then, you see a big difference very, very quickly, as long as they are consistent.
Interesting.
So yeah, they're highly successful. So, problem behavior can actually be identified at a young age. And you don't have to wait until they're 14, 15, 16, when you're like, oh my god, the peer groups, I don't like their friends and I don't like their this, and the parents doesn't know what to do with that. So I think that proper relationship practices have to start young, but it's never too late in the same time. So even if it's late, at the age of 16, when my emancipation was approved, I sat down with both my parents separately, and I
Yeah.
said, okay, from now on, moving forward, I want a relationship to look like this. These conversations are off the table. Like, I told my dad to stop talking about my mom, and I told my mom to stop talking about my dad, because they're not living together. They're separated. They have
Boundaries.
their own life. Yeah. And they were, so for years, I felt like I was in between because there was animosity between my divorced parents. And that was messing up with who I was. I didn't want to take a side. And so these kinds of things, I just sat down with them and I said, from now on, this is how I want the relationship to go. And to be honest, I never had to rehab this conversation. Like it became clear on what terms I wanted the relationship to be. And my parents, and it was a healthy way of moving forward. There were things that needed to stay in the past. And you know, I didn't want my old mistakes to be put back in my face all the time, because that keeps sort of like the label with labeling theory, that keeps bringing me back to that old identity. And especially in our teens, we're highly transformative. So as long as we get our old mistakes, our old naughty behaviors brought back into our present, we have a hard time unseeing that label and saying that's not me anymore, right? So I think that parents have to be fair with regards to environment. I think, again, support, listening. I see so many parents who are just not disposed to listening to their kids. And what I mean by listening, it's not just making space for them to talk, it's actually making space for them to talk safely without judgment, right? And there can be still, you know, underlying judgment, but you know, don't express it. Just be open to understanding the deeper experience from the point of view of the child or the teen. I think that a lot of the times, and we were talking before the podcast, I think a lot of the times it's about the youth feeling seen and recognized in their own unique identities, right? It's like, so when a parent, you know, questions a particular behavior, or they're angry about a particular behavior, is to sit down and say, why did you do that? Like, let me understand what were the drives behind that, you know, choice of yours. And, you know, I don't agree with it, but I'm trying to understand your point of view so that we can find a happy medium, or I can give you the support that you need so that this doesn't happen anymore. You know, and parents have to be the intermediary between the different worlds that the child is navigating. So we don't think about this. The child is navigating the home and the family, and then, like, you know, nuclear, perhaps the close family, and then they're also navigating the extended family, like, you know, going all the way to the community, the cousins, the bigger family, and those judgments are very salient in many cultures. And then there's the child is also navigating the school system, and then the extracurricular activity system, and then there's the public life, right? Like, especially when they're 12, 13, 14 years old, they start taking the bus, they start, you know, having time to themselves to explore their communities, or their, you know, their neighborhoods, or their you know, their cities. So in that free time, there's like the public space, and then there's the peer groups. And so the parents have to be present enough to understand how the child is navigating not just their life at home, but all of these different fields, social fields, and to find where the traumas are happening, or where the risk, when we say at risk, where the risk is happening. Because they're like, oh no, at home they're obedient, they do everything I say. Yeah, because they're, you know, they respect you, or because they are afraid of you, you know, as a parent. But how are they behaving elsewhere, and how can the parent help mediate those, you know, the behavioral choices that the child, I say child, but I mean teen, will you know, will make. So I think parental responsibilities extend beyond the household, and it's not just about control and like eliminating the risk. Like, oh, I don't want them to hang out with these people because these people are dangerous. So, okay, you want to hang out with these people? I can't stop you because, you know, you're 16, 17 years old or whatever. But I want you to still be able to make important, you know, the right choices in the presence of bad influence. So that's really important, having those conversations, saying like, okay, maybe you hang out with people who drink and do drugs, or steal things and do this. Like, how can I ask you a question as my child? Are you able to say no to that? Are you able to say, well, I don't want to get involved in this, so I'm going home now? Or I'm, you know, like, do you know when it's time to go home? You know, so that mediation, those conversations are really important to have, you know, between parent and teens.
And also comes from like the parents being more self-aware of themselves as well. I was reading this book by Dr. Shefali called The Conscious Parents, and she talked about like how parents feel like the kids are an extension to them. So they also feel threatened by their behavior, and they take it to themselves. And it's like, no, they are an individual human being, which is separate. They're coming from you, but they're not through you. They're not an extension of you. And they're not being, you know, it's also an understanding that, you know, not being threatened by it's not.
But I think I think this, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think this is really important with linking to something else. And that is different teens, different kids will have different ways of learning. And some kids learn well just with advice or rules, strict rules. You don't do this, these are the consequences. Some kids will not care about those. They'll
Yeah.
do it anyway, as long as they can hide it, and not, other and some kids do well with just advice. If I were you, I wouldn't
I
go
would.
there. Yeah, but other kids need to make their own mistakes, and they need to fall on their bums and be given the leeway to say, have you learned something from that? And big hug, and okay, we're gonna try to not make that mistake again. Do
I
we
am that
agree?
one. I am that second because my mom keeps saying like, "Oh, you don't have to try and make mistakes of your own every time." Like, yes, certain times I want to learn from them, but the other times I want to do my own thing and see where it lands me. And just
Yeah,
like I think
and
my
and
having my
parents
mom,
who go ahead.
yeah, having just my mom be there and like, okay, I'll be there if when you if you
And
fall.
when you
I
fall,
think that's so important, just having somebody who just believes in you, like, hey, climb your ladder, but if you I'm not gonna like push you towards it, but if you fall, I'm gonna be there to give you a hand.
yeah, exactly. So, but I think a lot of parents are even, because sometimes overbearing control can even lead to delinquency, because
That's true.
the child, the teen is suffocating, in that environment, and having a hard time to develop their own sense of
I
personal
get
identity, because the parents are too controlling, and there's no space to explore who am I really outside of those restraints or constraints. So I think that parents have to be able to understand the difference between their different kids, and to say, well, I realize you're the kind of kid that's going to go and make the mistake anyway, and I'll be there. I don't want to encourage the mistake. If you can take my advice, that would be better, but I'm not going to turn against you should you make that mistake and need my help to get out of it, right?
yeah.
So I think that that's really important. I find that overbearing control leads to a lot of frustration, and sometimes, and this is sort of where we stray away from the legal system, if they don't turn to delinquency as a result of overbearing control, or overbearing parenting, they may instead develop mental health problems, and sometimes both, right? Like mental health and delinquency issues, or at-risk issues. So the mental health thing, if you have it's not normal for a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old to already have chronic depression. Like, it's not normal.
Yeah.
And there are new studies that show that it may not actually be a chemical imbalance in the brain. So for a long time, the scholarship in psychology and psychiatry would rely on this explanation that it's depression is linked to a chemical imbalance in the brain. But the problem is that we have more recent studies that show that people with similar chemistries don't actually have the
Yeah.
same behaviors. So you would say, why is this person chronically depressed, whereas this person who has a similar neurological pattern, and chemistry, why isn't this person depressed? So because of these variances, we're now questioning this idea. And so I think I'm not a medical doctor, and not a nutritionist and all that things. There could be a lot of things happening in terms of the environment, what we eat, how we sleep, all that stuff that have consequences on our mental health. But I think that another reason why people go into delinquency are because of those mental health problems that are not just attributable to the mental chemistry, but rather to the social patterns around us,
That's true.
and the traumas that we may have experienced at a young age, right? It could be sexual abuse. It could be, just witnessing violence in the household increases the risk of becoming violent yourself. And then, reproducing that violence, not only in your, future intimate relations, but also in your peer groups and in public. So that's really, really interesting that, there are intergenerational
Uh,
traumas, and there are intergenerational patterns of behavior that we end up sort of trying to deal with. Part of mine, for example, and I always talk a little bit about myself because it helps sort of destigmatize, like, I'm a successful professor and I went through a lot of these things, and that doesn't mean that you're like that forever. But a lot of my struggles had to do with rage. And I was a rageful teen. I was angry. And I realized that part of that anger was carried forward by my own mother. And
That's
so my
very,
mother had
yeah,
bouts of hysterical rage at home. And I made that decision that I will not become like that, but it didn't mean that I wasn't feeling like that.
because your
I
body
wasn't,
carries it. Your
yeah,
body
I
needs
wasn't
for it.
punching, yeah, I wasn't punching holes in the walls, but damn it, I felt rageful inside. And that led me to the drugs because it was a way of numbing that intense rage.
Exactly.
So I think, yeah, I think that the doing the real work and making a decision on what we are creating for ourselves, what personality are we creating? I mean, we have to start that reflection early. I was quite early, but I think even earlier. I would have loved to have a mentor, a social worker, a counselor who at the age of 8, 9, 10 years old would have caught me and my earliest signs
Behavior sign.
of yeah, my earliest signs of asocial or antisocial behavior. I would have loved it if someone said, where do you think that comes from?
Just having that question, that having somebody, it's so important. Well, I am loving this conversation. It's just like we could go on, and I think that's like reminds me of all times. But as we reaching the end of the time, I just want to ask one. I know we had a lot of questions that we wanted to dig through, but I'm so glad that we were able to dig deeper into those questions that we just highlighted above. I wonder, like, wrapping up, I hear a lot about like the support that parents could provide, listening, and really listening and understanding without being threatened, or being without being that it's a question mark on their parenting, and understanding that one size does not fit all. In parenting, in growing up as children, like, it does not, one size may not fit all. There are a lot of different factors. So I wonder, like, as wrapping up, what is a piece of advice, or what is something that you want to leave behind, as ending and on a closing note, to somebody who might be struggling as a parent, as someone who might be struggling as a teen and they feel they're not being heard. They may have these varying factors that they just feel they're not being heard, what they can do, and probably as a parent who's struggling parenting.
Yeah, for parenting, I think um again, it's also trying to diffuse accumulated frustrations. Like, parents also carry years of frustration with difficult children, right? So diffusing that, being able to say, okay, I'm not going to carry the 10 years of having a naughty boy into the present and the
Yeah.
future in my relationship with that child. I think we have to allow everyone in any social dynamic to be transformative. Parents can change and kids can change, but usually they have to change together. Like, it's
uh,
really difficult for one to change while the others are not changing.
and it's just the
And
same pain.
my work with difficult teens usually has always entailed, try a new approach with your parents and be consistent with this new approach to see if it changes their behavior. And over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it does
It
change them, but unconsciously, instead of the parents actually coming to participating in the process of interrelational change.
does.
How do we have these conversations to say, well, I don't like how I am as a parent when I lose the plot and I raise my voice. I feel that I'm already at my wit's end when I raise my voice, and I don't know how to prevent that. And so, catching yourself and in that moment and saying, I want to parent differently, and not, always jumping to oh, it's for their own good, we know best, and sometimes that's just not the right approach with a difficult teen. So I think the more marginalized the teen feels in different social fields, including at home, but also perhaps school and peer groups
Yeah.
or society, this sense of marginalization, it requires the parent, I think, to develop a teamwork mentality. And so how can I work with you and you work with me to
The working
create,
relationship.
yes, to create an environment where you're happy and you feel passionate about things and engaged, like socially engaged with things
Yeah.
that are good for you and for the rest of the world. How can you be a positive force in my life, and how can I be a positive force in your life? And I think that space, it becomes sacred in the development of, and in improving both the behavior, the behavior of the child and the relationship between the child and their parent. But that requires effort and time and empathy and the willingness to leave the past in the past, because the more we take the baggage of the past and
Or
put
you
it back in
label
the
it.
present. Yeah, and part of one of the questions you talked about earlier, or that we prepared for, is this idea that labeling really matters, and that's the baggage that difficult youth carry. And so if it's internalized that I'm a problem kid, nobody trusts me,
The guilt
nobody,
comes in. There's a
yeah,
guilt.
nobody trusts me, so I don't need to prove that I can be trusted, because the trust is
Yeah.
already eroded anyway, or it's never existed. So how do we build trust? So those kinds of attitudes, like, is to leave all the labels behind and say, okay, let's start afresh. I'll do my best. And if I bring the past back into the present and it makes you feel uncomfortable, just remind me we said we wouldn't do this, and then we can, because old habits die hard, right?
Yeah.
So even
It's
for
a lot,
parents,
it's harder to leave that socialization and then yours of like mindset behind and be like, okay, because it sometimes unconsciously still comes back in. So it's very important to put yourself at check and like and they're blind spots. We
of
don't
course,
know that they're there and others
yeah,
see.
all
Yeah,
our life, we don't, this is something I've discovered, is that even, later in life, we don't see ourselves clearly. We
touch.
don't. It takes a great deal of meditation and non-judgment to say, like, to really see ourselves clearly, and feedback from others who are not afraid to tell us difficult truths about ourselves, right? So you're like, lay it on me.
It's
What do I
not
project?
easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, for example, I was dealing with my deeper rage, but I realized I carried an aggressive way of being well into my 20s. And it took me 10 years to really deal and erode that aggressivity, and to nurture my softness, nurture my, so yeah, the final advice, I'm gonna put myself out there. I understand sometimes discipline is important, but even in discipline, you can be gentle, and you can be, so you don't have to discipline your kids in in anger. You can say, I wish I didn't have to punish you, but I have to, because you broke the rule, and the rule entails a punishment. And I feel sorry that you did that, and I feel sorry that you're crying right now, but there are consequences to your actions. And so we don't have to, even in punishment or in discipline, we don't have to be rude and insulting and put down and put down the other and things like that. I think that nurturing that softness, even in firmness,
It's
is
wow.
really important. Yeah, because it makes the punishment feel safe.
It's for my good. It's for my
Legitimate.
good. And I'm trusted. Like I am still loved. I am
Yeah,
still seen. I am still heard. It's just that
yeah,
my actions, I have a consequence to it, what I've done. Wow.
yeah.
So
Right, like to be able to, for a parent to not jump into the old pattern of anger and up to here and radical anger. I think that's usually a recipe for disaster, and the feeling that the youth can't share who they really are. They're not safe. So I think that even in discipline and punishment, there's a way to be gentle and soft.
wow.
And parents have to also culture that in their own heart, because there's so much accumulated tension.
That's
So both in the teen and in the and it I think that might actually also make a huge difference against bullying, because when bullies understand the importance of softness in their life, at home, in their peer
yeah.
environment, they start themselves nurturing that softness, that gentleness towards others, right?
It starts from them, and then it just projects. They're just able to project.
Yeah, it's contagious. Like, I don't like to be treated yucky, like in a way that makes me feel, crappy.
Yeah.
So, and in very mundane situations, when people are nice about even something that is a bad consequence of something we did, it's better. Like, a couple of years ago, I got a fine for speeding, but the policeman was so nice. And I was like, we laughed. I apologized. I didn't realize how fast I was going, but it wasn't like he didn't assume that it was on purpose. He didn't assume that I was a bad driver. He didn't project that onto me. It was and I thought, if there's any good way to get a fine, that's the way. The policeman was nice and soft with me and jovial, and so again, even in discipline and punishment, there's a nice way to apply it.
Wow, that's such a insightful advice. I am sure people will be watching this would really appreciate this, because it's not like it's a gray situation. It's not like one or the other. It's like there is a midway towards this.
But it's the one thing that every human, and perhaps all life needs. All human needs that gentleness. Like, there's not a single person in the world who did something bad who wants to attract the bad. It's just like that. They didn't think, they didn't think that doing something, I don't like the good bad dialectic, but you know what I mean. Like, that softness is the best gift that we can give to anyone else, to each other.
That's so insightful. Well, that brings us to the end of this podcast, Real Talks with Anusha, Untangling Labels, one conversation at a time. This was the first conversation with none other than Dr. Severine Minot, and I am so grateful for this conversation and for so many great insights. Thank you so much, Dr. Severine, for being here. For all those who will be watching this, if you have any questions, make sure that you write those questions down on the chat, and we'll try to answer them. We might not have the answers to all the questions because they're big questions, but we'll try to address them. And stay tuned for our upcoming podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Severine.
Thank you for having me. And if there's any questions directed to me, I'll be glad to answer them. So you can, Anusha, you're welcome to just, email them to me, and I'll write a response for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Take care.